For centuries, gold was the one thing that governments could not counterfeit. It never rusted, could not be printed, and looked the same whether you were in London, Cairo, or Beijing. It represented permanence in a world that constantly changed. People treated it as the closest thing to universal truth, something that could not lie. That sense of trust lasted until governments discovered how to take gold for themselves and to do it legally. Well, this is monetary literacy, where the stories of money, politics, and power intersect, and where history rarely turns out to be as simple as it first appears. When most people picture a gold heist, they imagine robbers in masks, armored trucks racing through city streets, or Hollywood scenes full of tension. The truth is less dramatic and far more significant. The largest gold thefts in history did not involve guns or getaway cars. They happened quietly, through paperwork, official signatures, and policies crafted behind closed doors. When a government moves its own gold in secret, no one calls it theft. They call it national policy. You see, to understand how this began, we need to step back to the time when gold was not only valuable but synonymous with money itself. In the 19th century, much of the world lived under the gold standard. Every major currency, the dollar, the pound, the franc, was tied to a specific quantity of gold. A paper note was nothing more than a claim ticket for that metal, and anyone could exchange it at a central bank. It was a system based on honesty and restraint. A nation could not simply print more money unless it possessed enough gold to support it. Restraint, however, has never been humanity's strongest quality. As wars erupted and debts piled up, governments began to bend their own rules. They printed more paper than their gold supplies could justify, first by small amounts and later by large ones. The gold standard turned into a kind of shared illusion. Vaults remained locked, and people continued to believe the gold was still there. That belief kept the system alive, at least until confidence began to collapse. Anyway, the first true global gold heist unfolded during World War I. Desperate for funds, European powers suspended the gold standard, confiscated citizens' gold, and replaced it with paper notes that promised repayment someday. Banks sealed their vaults, and gold disappeared from daily circulation. It was not stolen by thieves hiding in shadows. It was taken by governments that needed to pay for war. When the fighting ended, the economic damage was staggering. Currencies lost their value, debts multiplied, and inflation devoured savings. Germany's mark became worthless. Austria, Hungary, and Russia suffered the same fate. Only gold retained its worth, which made it politically dangerous because it exposed the fragility of paper money. Leaders realized they would need to control that danger before it controlled them. Honestly, that realization set the stage for everything that followed. In 1933, during the depths of the Great Depression, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 6102. The order made it illegal for American citizens to own gold coins or bullion. People were required to turn their gold into the government in exchange for $20.67 per ounce, which was the official price at the time. Refusal carried the threat of fines or even prison. A few months later, the government quietly raised the official gold price to $35 per ounce. Overnight, Washington had increased the paper value of its gold holdings by roughly 70%. Millions of Americans had lost wealth legally. Well, it was one of the most daring acts of financial engineering the world had ever seen, and it worked. The gold stayed with the government. Citizens were left with paper bills that still claimed to be backed by gold, even though they could never redeem them. What looked like stability was actually control, wrapped in the appearance of fairness. From that moment forward, manipulating gold became an accepted practice for governments under financial stress. As long as gold determined the value of money, controlling gold meant controlling perception itself. Politicians and central bankers realized that whoever commanded the metal could command the narrative about value. You see, by the end of World War II, the United States had risen as the dominant holder of gold on the planet. Europe was devastated, its treasuries drained and its cities in ruins. American vaults, by contrast, were overflowing with more than 20,000 tons of gold, nearly two-thirds of the world's total supply. That power allowed the United States to design a new economic order at the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944. Under the Bretton Woods system, the world's major currencies were tied to the United States dollar, and the dollar itself was linked to gold at a fixed rate of $35 an ounce. Overnight, Washington had increased the paper value of its gold holdings by roughly 70%. Millions of Americans had lost wealth legally. Well, it was one of the most daring acts of financial engineering the world had ever seen, and it worked. The gold stayed with the government. Citizens were left with paper bills that still claimed to be backed by gold, even though they could never redeem them. What looked like stability was actually control, wrapped in the appearance of fairness. From that moment forward, manipulating gold became an accepted practice for governments under financial stress. As long as gold determined the value of money, controlling gold meant controlling perception itself. Politicians and central bankers realized that whoever commanded the metal could command the narrative about value. You see, by the end of World War II, the United States had risen as the dominant holder of gold on the planet. Europe was devastated, its treasuries drained and its cities in ruins. American vaults, by contrast, were overflowing with more than 20,000 tons of gold, nearly two-thirds of the world's total supply. That power allowed the United States to design a new economic order at the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944. Under the Bretton Woods system, the world's major currencies were tied to the United States dollar, and the dollar itself was linked to gold at a fixed rate of $35 an ounce. On paper, any country could exchange its dollars for gold whenever it wished. In practice, the system relied on trust in the United States to play by its own rules. For a time, that trust held. Anyway, it was a delicate balance built on faith rather than enforcement. The illusion was perfect while it lasted, yet faith, like gold, is finite. The post-war boom and the cost of new global ambitions would soon strain that faith to its breaking point. During the 1950s and 1960s, the United States began spending far more than it earned. The Korean and Vietnam Wars, the space race, and massive domestic programs demanded staggering amounts of money. Dollars poured out of the country faster than gold flowed back in. By the end of the 1960s, there were many more dollars circulating around the world than there was gold in American vaults to support them. Well, other nations began to notice. Among them was France, led by President Charles de Gaulle. He understood the imbalance and decided to call America's bluff. In 1965, he sent a French warship to New York Harbor, carrying instructions to exchange billions of United States dollars for physical gold and bring it home. France wanted proof that the system actually worked. Soon, other countries followed France's example. Shipments of gold left American vaults every month. The United States, alarmed by the rapid depletion of its reserves, worked with allies to create a quiet alliance called the London Gold Pool. The idea was simple. If the price of gold began to rise, a sign that people were losing faith in the dollar, the member nations would sell gold into the market to drive the price back down. You see, the pool included the United States, Britain, and several European central banks. For a few years, the arrangement managed to keep gold's price fixed at $35 an ounce. The illusion of stability continued, but underneath, pressure was building. By 1968, the gold pool could no longer keep up. The world's confidence in the dollar was eroding too quickly. America's reserves had already dropped from over 20,000 tons to barely 8,000. Gold was literally sailing away. The breaking point came in the summer of 1971. On August 15th, President Richard Nixon appeared on live television and spoke calmly to the nation. He announced that the United States would temporarily suspend the dollar's convertibility into gold. It sounded like a technical change, but in reality, it was the most significant financial decision of the 20th century. Anyway, overnight, Nixon ended the Bretton Woods system and severed the last link between money and metal. The United States had, in effect, defaulted on its gold promise without admitting it. It was the ultimate gold heist, a country keeping both the gold and the trust of those who believed its word. Other nations still held dollars, but those dollars were no longer backed by anything tangible. The gold stayed in Fort Knox, the paper stayed in circulation, and the world continued to act as if nothing had changed. To maintain the illusion, the United States built a new foundation for its currency. This time, it was not tied to gold, but to oil. Through agreements with Saudi Arabia and the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, Washington arranged for global oil to be priced exclusively in United States dollars. That decision created what became known as the petrodollar system. Honestly, this meant nations no longer needed dollars for gold, they needed them for energy. The demand for oil kept the dollar strong even without metal behind it. The world had traded one kind of backing for another, replacing gold with geopolitics. Even after Nixon's announcement, the gold never truly stopped moving. It simply slipped into the shadows. Governments continued to buy, sell, lease, and swap gold with one another away from public view. These transactions were labeled monetary operations and were said to be part of normal financial management. Every movement of metal was reframed as a technical adjustment meant to maintain stability. The manipulation of gold was no longer considered a crime, it was redefined as policy. Well, after 1971, economists and politicians began to say that gold was no longer relevant. Money had gone digital, debt had become limitless, and the world moved forward believing gold was obsolete. They called it a relic of an older age. But power has a way of holding on to anything that can still serve a purpose. Governments didn't give up on gold, they simply changed how they used it. Instead of supporting currencies directly, they managed it from behind the scenes. The official line was that gold didn't matter anymore. In practice, central banks continued trading and lending gold among themselves in secret. These transactions were described as part of reserve management, though few outside the financial world understood what that really meant. The reality was simpler. It was the same game as before, using gold to shape markets without acknowledging it publicly. You see, the first major move in this new era came during the late 1990s when global confidence in paper assets was at its peak. The Bank of England, under Chancellor Gordon Brown, announced plans to sell more than half of Britain's gold reserves, about 400 tons. The stated reason was to diversify the country's holdings, but the decision shocked markets and sent gold prices to a 20-year low. Within just a few years, those same prices tripled. Britain had sold its gold near the very bottom of the market. Critics called it Brown's bottom. Some observers suggested that the sale had quietly helped major financial institutions cover their short positions in gold, effectively bailing them out at the expense of the British public. Whatever the motive, that sale marked a turning point. Western governments were no longer hoarding gold as wealth. They were managing it as just another tool of financial policy. Anyway, while the West was selling or leasing gold, other parts of the world were watching closely. In the 2000s, countries like China, Russia, and India began to buy gold steadily and quietly. They were not collecting it for fashion or nostalgia, but for strategy. Those governments understood what the West preferred to ignore. Gold might not back currencies anymore, but it still represented confidence. And during times of crisis, confidence is the most valuable asset of all. This shift marked the beginning of a global divergence. Western nations viewed gold as outdated, while emerging economies saw it as insurance against instability. The result was a slow but powerful redistribution of influence, measured not in speeches or treaties, but in ounces of metal quietly transferred from one vault to another. Honestly, by the time the early 2000s arrived, it had become clear that the world was entering a new phase of monetary competition. The story of gold was no longer about jewelry or inflation hedges. It was about power, trust, and who would control the next chapter of global finance. The 2008 financial crisis changed everything. Trust in banks, governments, and paper currencies collapsed almost overnight. People who had once believed the system was stable began to question everything about it. Gold, which had been dismissed for decades, suddenly returned to the center of the conversation. It wasn't about using it as money again, it was about what it represented. In a time of uncertainty, gold became a signal that confidence was fading. Even central banks that had once sold gold began buying it back. Germany demanded that the gold it had stored in New York and Paris be returned home. The Netherlands and Austria made similar requests. Each nation described the move as repatriation, but the message underneath was clear. They trusted themselves more than they trusted anyone else. By the 2010s, that quiet shift had become global. China steadily increased its gold reserves month after month. Russia doubled its holdings in less than a decade. Countries excluded from the dollar system, such as Iran and Turkey, started using gold in trade to bypass sanctions. The pattern was impossible to ignore. 1 ounce at a time, power was moving eastward. You see, while the United States defended the dollar through its military strength, energy influence, and control of international banking, the foundation beneath it all began to show cracks. Western nations printed trillions of new dollars and euros to rescue their economies after 2008. Meanwhile, emerging economies were quietly diversifying into something that no central bank could dilute: physical metal. By the early 2020s, central banks around the world were buying gold faster than at any point in modern history. More than 1,000 tons were added in a single year. These purchases weren't about decoration or tradition, they were about preparation. The people making those decisions believed another reset was coming, and they wanted insurance for when it did. Anyway, history has a habit of repeating itself. Every empire, once it finds itself cornered by debt, turns back to gold. Some governments confiscate it, others change its price. Some simply pretend their vaults are full. The modern manipulation is no longer about hiding gold in basements. It happens in the markets. Gold's price is now shaped by paper contracts traded in financial centers like London and New York. For every physical ounce in existence, there are dozens of paper promises claiming to represent it. This system keeps prices steady on the surface, though many argue it holds them artificially low. It's a familiar trick. In the 1960s, governments tried to manage public perception of gold's value to protect their currencies. Now, the same approach plays out through financial instruments instead of secret pools. The method has changed, but the motive has not. Control the perception, and you control the value. Honestly, we live in a time when digital currencies, inflation, and political divisions are eroding confidence in money all over again. When faith in paper fades, people turn to gold. They do it not because gold earns interest or grows, but because it doesn't lie. That is why this story is far from over. The new gold heist no longer involves citizens handing over their coins. It is about nations competing to control what's left. Countries are racing to rewrite the rules of value before the next crisis decides those rules for them. Well, the United States still claims the largest stockpile of gold in the world. Europe maintains significant reserves too, yet the real momentum now lies in Asia. Led by China, the region controls most of the new global supply through mining, refining, and strategic purchases. For the first time in a century, the balance of metallic power is shifting eastward. History has shown that when gold moves, empires move with it. When Spain's treasure fleets dried up in the 1600s, its empire began to fade. When Britain's reserves collapsed after two world wars, its dominance gave way. Now, as the dollar system strains under historic levels of debt, gold seems to be delivering another warning. Anyway, if the United States can no longer maintain global trust through paper promises, another power will attempt to do it through metal. The same pattern that began in 1933, governments manipulating gold to preserve control, is now repeating itself on a worldwide scale. Only this time, the goal may not be to protect the old system, but to build a new one on its ruins. In the end, gold is more than just a mineral pulled from the ground. It's a mirror that reflects what nations truly believe about themselves. When governments hoard it, they fear what lies ahead. When they sell it, they think they control the future. And when they lie about it, they've already lost that control. Honestly, every government that has ever dealt with gold has tried to bend it to its will, and none have succeeded for long. Gold doesn't answer to politics or policy. It answers to physics and scarcity. In a world drowning in debt, that makes it the most dangerous kind of truth. The global gold theft never really ended, it just learned to dress differently. Now it speaks in the careful language of economics and the formal tone of central banking. And the next time a government says, "Don't worry, the gold is safe," remember, it always is, until the day it isn't. If this story gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History holds the answers, and I'll show you where to find them.